I've always believed that the most powerful thing a person can have is their silence. It speaks louder than words. But Sophie Reynolds, the shy waitress, knew how to use it to her advantage. The tension in the room was palpable as Sophie stood motionless, the weight of what she had just done hanging in the air. Jack Carter, the billionaire, stared at her, his mind racing to catch up with the unexpected turn of events. Sophie had just saved his multi-million-dollar deal with a few simple words. It wasn't supposed to happen this way. He had always been in control, always the one who held the power in any room. But tonight, he had been blindsided by a waitress. Not just any waitress, but someone who had quietly dismantled his arrogance with nothing more than fluency in a language he barely understood. Sophie's calm presence stood in stark contrast to the chaos unfolding in Jack's mind. As the silence stretched between them, Jack could feel his confidence crumbling. "You're incredible," he finally said, his voice low, almost reverent. Sophie looked at him without a flicker of emotion. "I'm just doing my job," she replied, her tone steady and unassuming. But Jack wasn't fooled. He could feel something deeper in her. There was no way a simple waitress, someone who spent her days serving the likes of him, could be so effortlessly composed and capable. "How long have you been working here?" he asked, his curiosity pushing past his usual need for control. Sophie glanced at him, her eyes not meeting his directly, almost as if she was weighing the value of answering him. "Long enough," she said simply, before turning her attention back to the table. Jack felt a sharp pang of embarrassment. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't sure what to say. He had built his empire on strategy, on being steps ahead of everyone around him, but Sophie had just shown him the most important thing he'd been missing: humility. She had no reason to help him, no obligation to step in, and yet she had. Her calmness, her knowledge, her ability to remain grounded in a world that constantly sought to shake him. It was something Jack hadn't experienced in years. "What do you want, Sophie?" he asked, his voice softer now, as he considered the woman standing in front of him. She paused, not surprised by the question. "I want nothing from you," she replied, her eyes meeting his for the first time. "I do what I do because it's right." Jack couldn't quite believe her response. It was so simple, yet it struck him like a revelation. Sophie wasn't interested in money, fame, or power. She didn't need anything from him. And yet she had just given him something more valuable than anything he had ever earned. She had given him a lesson in how to truly listen, in how to look beyond the surface and see the potential in people, something Jack had always ignored. Sophie wasn't just a waitress. She was a reminder that the world didn't revolve around people like him. It was a humbling realization, one that Jack wasn't ready to admit but couldn't ignore. As he watched Sophie walk away, his thoughts were a mess of contradictions. He had made billions, built a career that everyone admired, and yet, in that one moment, he felt smaller than he ever had before. Sophie Reynolds had done what no one else could. She had taken him by surprise, shattered his perception of power, and left him speechless. Jack couldn't get Sophie out of his mind. The next few days passed in a blur of meetings, deals, and calls, but no matter what he did, his thoughts kept returning to her. It wasn't just that she had saved his deal. It was the way she had done it. Calm, composed, and utterly unbothered by the world around her. He was used to people needing something from him. His wealth, his influence, it was all a means to an end for most people. But Sophie had wanted nothing. She had stepped in purely because it was the right thing to do. No ulterior motives. No expectations. That kind of selflessness was rare in his world, and it unsettled him. As the days went by, Jack found himself increasingly distracted. His meetings were no longer about strategy or making the best deal, they were about Sophie. He couldn't stop thinking about her. He found himself scanning the restaurant where she worked, hoping to catch a glimpse of her. But when he did, he only saw her at the far end of the room, quietly serving drinks or delivering orders. She was always in the background, never making a scene, never drawing attention to herself. It frustrated him. He had tried everything: business deals, expensive gifts, the allure of power, but Sophie was a mystery he couldn't crack. One evening, unable to stand the distance any longer, Jack walked into the restaurant again. He was determined to speak to her, to understand what made her so different from everyone else he knew. Sophie saw him as soon as he entered. She didn't flinch, didn't look nervous. She simply continued her work, a quiet confidence in the way she moved. Jack approached her, and she looked up at him without hesitation. "What can I get for you, Mr. Carter?" she asked, her voice steady, professional. "You can call me Jack," he said, his tone softer than usual. He looked at her for a moment before speaking again. "I wanted to thank you for what you did." Sophie's expression didn't change, but there was a slight shift in her eyes, an acknowledgement of his words, but no sign of surprise. "You don't need to thank me," she said quietly. "It was just my job." Jack paused, studying her face. "No," he said, shaking his head slowly. "It wasn't just your job. You did something no one else would have done." Sophie looked away briefly, her gaze softening. She wasn't interested in the praise. "I just did what was right," she replied simply. Jack found himself at a loss for words. He had met so many people in his life, yet Sophie was unlike anyone he had ever known. There was something about her that made him question everything he had ever believed. In his world, success was built on power and control. But Sophie, with her quiet strength and calm resolve, had shown him something else. She had shown him that sometimes, the most powerful thing a person can have is the ability to remain grounded, no matter what the world throws at them. It was a lesson Jack hadn't expected to learn, but one he would never forget. He stood there, staring at her, for what felt like an eternity. And then, finally, he spoke again. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice low and serious. "You're not just a waitress, Sophie. You're something more." Sophie didn't respond at first. She simply looked at him, her expression unreadable. But Jack could see something flicker in her eyes, a recognition, perhaps, of the truth he was finally seeing. She wasn't just a server. She wasn't just someone who helped him save a deal. She was someone who had the ability to make him rethink everything he knew about success and power. And for the first time in his life, Jack realized that perhaps the greatest power lay not in having everything, but in knowing when to step back and let someone else take control. Sophie smiled softly, a small but genuine smile, before turning away to continue her work. Jack stood there for a moment longer, watching her, as the weight of his thoughts settled in. He was still figuring out what Sophie had meant to him, but one thing was clear: she had changed him in a way that no business deal or financial success ever could. Jack could not shake the feeling that something had changed within him. It wasn't just the deal that Sophie had saved, it was the way she had made him feel, something he hadn't experienced in years. A quiet realization had begun to settle in his mind. Sophie wasn't just another person in his world. She was a presence, a force he hadn't fully understood yet. He found himself thinking about her long after he had left the restaurant. His usual routine of meetings and business calls seemed meaningless now, and he couldn't help but wonder what had drawn him to her. Was it her intelligence? Her calm demeanor? Or perhaps it was the way she had looked at him without any fear or admiration. For once, Jack felt like he was the one who needed to learn something. Sophie had become a riddle he wanted to solve, but every time he thought he understood her, she managed to surprise him even more. His thoughts were interrupted one evening when he walked into the restaurant again. He was determined to talk to her, to understand her better, and most importantly, to ask her why she had done what she did. As soon as Sophie saw him, she gave a slight nod, acknowledging his presence without skipping a beat. She continued with her tasks, never missing a step in her routine. It was as if she didn't need to make any grand gestures to prove her worth. Jack walked up to her as she was wiping down a table, his eyes focused on her every movement. "Sophie," he said, his voice gentler than usual. She looked up at him, and for a brief moment, their eyes locked. "Jack," she replied, her tone polite but neutral. "What can I do for you today?" Jack hesitated. He wasn't sure how to approach this conversation. For once, he felt unsure of himself. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice a little softer than before, "about what happened the other day." Sophie didn't respond immediately. She simply waited for him to continue, her gaze calm and steady. "You saved the deal," he said, his eyes searching hers. "But why? You didn't have to do that. I could have handled it, but you stepped in without any hesitation." Sophie set the rag down on the table, taking a moment before speaking. "I didn't do it for you," she said simply. "I did it because it was the right thing to do." Jack blinked, surprised by her answer. "But I didn't ask for your help. You didn't owe me anything." Sophie's expression softened slightly, but her voice remained even. "I don't need to owe someone to do what's right, Jack. Sometimes, doing the right thing is the only thing that matters." Jack was taken aback by her response. He had always believed that actions had to be transactional, that everything in life had a cost. But Sophie had shown him a different way to live, one that didn't revolve around power, money, or control. She had done something selfless, and for the first time, Jack found himself questioning his own motives. "You're different," he said quietly, more to himself than to her. Sophie didn't respond, but her eyes met his with a look of understanding. She didn't need to say anything else. She had already said everything she needed to with her actions. "I don't know if I understand you," Jack admitted, his voice low. "But I want to. I want to learn what makes you, you." Sophie gave him a small, almost imperceptible smile. "You don't have to understand everything, Jack," she said, her tone gentle. "Sometimes, just being open to learning is enough." Jack watched her for a long moment, taking in her words, trying to absorb the lesson she had just shared with him. She had no interest in his wealth, his power, or his status. She was just someone who did what was right, regardless of the consequences. And somehow, that made her far more powerful than anyone he had ever met. Jack spent the next few days thinking about Sophie and the unexpected encounter they had shared. He could not shake the image of her calm, collected demeanor, the way she moved through life without any need for recognition or approval. Sophie had changed something in him, something deep that he couldn't quite understand. He had spent years building his empire, accumulating wealth and power, but none of it seemed to matter now. Sophie's words echoed in his mind. Sometimes, just being open to learning is enough. The idea that life could be about doing the right thing without expecting anything in return had never occurred to him. It was a concept so foreign to Jack's world of deals and transactions, yet it felt more real than anything he had ever known. He found himself visiting the restaurant more frequently, not just because he wanted to see her, but because he needed to understand what made Sophie tick. What drove her? What made her so different from everyone else he had known? One evening, as Jack entered the restaurant, he noticed Sophie sitting alone at a small table in the corner, sipping a cup of coffee. It was rare for her to take a break, and Jack couldn't help but wonder what she was thinking. He walked over to her, his heart racing slightly. She looked up at him, her expression neutral but welcoming. "You're here again," Sophie said, the faintest smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "I guess I am," Jack replied, his voice soft. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. Sophie didn't object, merely raising an eyebrow in curiosity. "You've been on my mind," Jack said after a moment, his gaze not leaving hers. "I can't stop thinking about what you said. About doing the right thing without expecting anything in return." Sophie's eyes softened, but she said nothing. Jack continued, "I've spent my entire life building an empire. I've been taught to focus on profit, to keep my cards close, and to never show weakness. But you've shown me something I've never seen before. Something I've never understood." Sophie took a slow sip of her coffee, considering his words carefully. "I didn't do it for you, Jack," she finally said, her voice low. "I did it because it was the right thing to do. I don't need to expect anything in return. Sometimes, the right thing is its own reward." Jack stared at her, feeling a wave of emotion wash over him. It was as though Sophie had stripped away everything he thought he knew about the world. In her simplicity, in her selflessness, she had taught him more than any business deal or power struggle ever had. I'm starting to see that, Jack admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm starting to understand that maybe I've been looking at everything the wrong way. I've been chasing the wrong things. Sophie's gaze softened even further. It's never too late to start changing, Jack, she said gently. You don't need to have it all figured out. Just start with doing what's right, one step at a time. Jack looked at her, his mind racing. For the first time in years, he felt like he was seeing the world with new eyes. He had spent so much time focused on the pursuit of more money, more power, more control. But now, he realized that none of that would ever be enough. It was moments like this, moments of quiet clarity, that truly mattered. As he sat there with Sophie, he knew he was on the verge of something bigger than any business venture he had ever pursued. It was the beginning of understanding what it meant to be human, to care, to do the right thing simply because it was right. And for the first time in his life, Jack Carter felt truly alive. Days passed, and Jack found himself returning to the restaurant more often. Each time he stepped through the door, Sophie's calm presence seemed to ground him in a way he couldn't explain. Her simple yet profound perspective on life had started to seep into his every thought. He realized how little he truly understood about connection, about humanity, and what it meant to live beyond just accumulating wealth. Sophie was always the same, quiet, composed, and always doing what she felt was right, with no expectation of praise or reward. Jack found himself gravitating toward her, wanting to learn more about this quiet strength that seemed to fill the room whenever she was near. But he couldn't help but wonder, why did she seem so content with what she had? Sophie never asked for more, never sought to climb any ladder. She was a waitress, but Jack now knew that title didn't define her. It was just a part of her story, not the whole of it. One evening, Jack arrived earlier than usual, finding Sophie alone at the bar as the restaurant wasn't crowded yet. He took a seat next to her, and for the first time, he didn't feel the need to rush into a conversation. He simply sat there, quietly, the hum of the restaurant's early evening setting the tone. Sophie looked up at him, her calm smile welcoming as always. I didn't expect to see you so soon, she said softly. Jack returned her smile, but there was a quiet intensity behind his eyes. I've been thinking a lot lately, he began, his voice steady. About what you said. About doing the right thing and not expecting anything in return. Sophie didn't interrupt. She simply looked at him, waiting for him to continue. I've spent my life working for the next big deal, the next step, the next success, Jack said, his voice quieter now, almost reflective. But I've realized that none of it has brought me the peace that you seem to have. You seem at ease with who you are, with where you are in life. And I don't understand that. Sophie set down the glass she was cleaning, her gaze never leaving his. I'm not at ease because I have everything, she said gently. I'm at ease because I don't need anything more than what I have right now. Sometimes, we make things complicated by wanting more than we need. Jack listened, his mind processing the weight of her words. I've always believed that success meant getting more money, more deals, more power. But it's never been enough, he admitted. Sophie's eyes softened. That's the trap, Jack. The more you want, the more you'll find yourself chasing, but never truly satisfied. It's not about more. It's about doing the best you can with what you already have, and being at peace with it. Jack sat back, taking in her words. He wasn't used to hearing this kind of wisdom. He had spent his entire life focused on achieving, on pushing forward, but Sophie was telling him to stop and simply be. It felt strange, almost uncomfortable, but there was something undeniably true about it. He was beginning to realize that Sophie had a depth that went far beyond anything he could have imagined. She wasn't just a waitress. She was someone who had found a kind of peace that Jack could only dream of. You make it sound so simple, Jack said quietly, almost to himself. It's not simple, Sophie replied. But it is possible. You don't need to have everything figured out. You just need to start by being honest with yourself. Jack looked at her, a small but genuine smile tugging at his lips. "I think I have a lot to learn from you, Sophie," he said, his voice sincere. Sophie smiled back, but there was no arrogance in her expression, just a quiet understanding. "And I think you're starting to learn," she replied softly. Jack felt something stir within him. For the first time in years, he didn't feel the pressure to keep climbing. He didn't need to push for the next big win. Sitting here with Sophie, he realized that he was already exactly where he needed to be. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Jack's life had been shifting in ways he couldn't quite explain. Every conversation with Sophie seemed to open new doors in his mind, doors that had been locked for years. He had been taught to focus on control, to demand results, to push people for more. But now, Sophie's calm and effortless way of living seemed like a distant echo of something more meaningful. He found himself thinking about what she had said again and again. "It's not about more. It's about doing the best you can with what you already have." It was an idea that clung to him, a reminder that he didn't need to keep striving for more to find happiness. But there was still something missing. Jack had built an empire, yet he was starting to realize it hadn't given him the fulfillment he had imagined. There was still a nagging emptiness in his chest. He had spent years looking outward, but now, for the first time, he found himself looking inward. Sophie had offered him an understanding of life that was foreign to him, but it wasn't until he spent time reflecting on it alone that he truly understood what she meant. One day, Jack found himself sitting at the corner booth of the restaurant, not waiting for a deal or meeting, but simply there, waiting for Sophie to finish her shift. He wasn't sure what had prompted the visit, but something inside him told him he needed to be there. Sophie walked in, her smile as calm as always. She looked at him with quiet curiosity, clearly surprised to see him sitting alone, waiting. She didn't ask questions. Instead, she simply took a seat across from him, and for the first time, they didn't need to talk about anything specific. They just sat in silence. Jack felt an overwhelming sense of peace, something he hadn't known for a long time. The weight of his world seemed lighter in Sophie's presence. It was strange, this feeling of being content without needing to prove anything. For once, he didn't feel the pressure to perform. "You're quiet today," Sophie said, her voice soft, breaking the silence between them. "I'm thinking," Jack replied, his voice distant as he gazed out the window. "About everything. About you. About the way you see the world." Sophie's smile remained unchanged. "What are you thinking about, Jack?" she asked. "How I spent my life chasing things that don't matter," Jack admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've always thought success was about more. More money, more power, more influence. But you," he paused, his voice catching slightly, "you've shown me that success doesn't need to be about more. You've shown me that just being present is enough. I don't have to chase after something that doesn't fill me." Sophie reached across the table, her hand gently resting on his. "You're starting to see it, Jack," she said. "It's not about what you can get. It's about what you can give, how you show up, how you live in the moment, how you treat the people around you." Jack felt a warmth spread through him, something he hadn't felt in years. It wasn't about business, or transactions, or achieving anything. It was about living in a way that felt right, not based on what the world told him he should want, but based on what his heart truly craved. For the first time, he felt like he was seeing things clearly. Sophie wasn't just a waitress. She was a reflection of everything he had been missing. And for the first time, Jack realized that the key to happiness wasn't in the next big deal, or the next step up the ladder. It was in the quiet moments, the connections, the simple truth of living authentically. He had been running for so long, always looking for the next big thing. But now, he realized the most important thing he needed to find was peace with himself. It had been weeks since that night at the restaurant, and Jack found himself at a crossroads he never expected. He had always prided himself on being a man of action, of doing whatever it took to achieve his goals. But now, after everything Sophie had shown him, he couldn't ignore the fact that he was still searching for something deeper, something more meaningful than business deals or the next big acquisition. He had started living in the moment, paying attention to the people around him, especially Sophie. There was something in her quiet strength that called to him, something that made him realize how disconnected he had been from the world. Sophie had given him something that money couldn't buy, a sense of clarity, a path that didn't lead to more power, but to peace. Jack knew he had to act on this newfound perspective, but he didn't know where to start. He wasn't used to feeling vulnerable or unsure, but Sophie had opened a door he couldn't close. He found himself making small changes in his life, spending more time with people he cared about, taking moments to appreciate the small things, not rushing from one meeting to the next, but allowing himself to be present in each moment. He had even started spending more time at the restaurant, not to strike a deal, but simply to be around Sophie. It was becoming clear to him that there was no simple formula to life, no set of rules that could guarantee happiness. It wasn't about success or wealth. It was about the connections he made, the authenticity he found within himself, and the way he could contribute to the world without expecting anything in return. One afternoon, Jack sat at the bar of the restaurant, waiting for Sophie to finish her shift. He had something on his mind, something important he had been meaning to say to her. As she walked in, he felt a rush of emotion. He had never been the kind of person to open up to anyone, but something about Sophie made it easy to trust her. She gave him a soft smile as she took the seat next to him. "You're here early today," she said, her voice warm and kind. Jack looked at her, his heart pounding. "I've been thinking a lot," he began, his voice steady but full of meaning. "About everything we've talked about. About how you've shown me a different way to live." Sophie tilted her head slightly, listening attentively. "I'm glad you're thinking about it," she said softly. Jack exhaled, gathering his thoughts. "I've spent so much of my life chasing things, chasing success, power, control. But I've come to realize that it's all been empty. It's never been enough." Sophie looked at him, her eyes filled with understanding. "I never asked for anything more, Jack," she said quietly. "I've learned that life isn't about what we acquire, it's about who we become." Jack nodded, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. "You've shown me something I didn't even know I was missing," he admitted. "I thought I had to keep pushing for more. But now I see that I've been running in circles." Sophie smiled gently. "Sometimes, Jack, the key to living is letting go of the need for more. Being content with where you are, with who you are, that's where peace comes from." Jack felt a sense of calm wash over him. He had spent so long trying to prove something to the world, to build an empire that would define him. But now, he realized that what mattered most wasn't what he had achieved, it was the person he was becoming. And in that moment, he felt a deep sense of gratitude for Sophie, for showing him that the greatest success in life wasn't measured by how much you had, but by how much you gave, by how present you were, by how you made others feel. "I don't think I could have learned this from anyone else," Jack said softly, his voice full of sincerity. "Thank you, Sophie, for showing me what truly matters." Sophie simply smiled, her eyes warm and knowing. "You don't have to thank me, Jack. You've always had this within you. You just needed to see it." Jack looked at her, realizing how much he had changed. He had found something he had been searching for all along, true happiness, not in the pursuit of more, but in the acceptance of enough. And for the first time in his life, he felt whole. Weeks passed, and the changes in Jack were becoming undeniable. He felt different, but it wasn't just the shift in his perspective, it was something deeper. Sophie had shown him that the key to life wasn't about having more, but about appreciating what you had and being present with the people around you. Jack's routine had completely transformed. He no longer rushed from meeting to meeting, chasing the next big deal or victory. Instead, he found himself taking time to connect with the people he cared about, listening more, and being fully present in the moment. And as he continued to visit the restaurant, he noticed the subtle ways Sophie's presence affected his daily life. The peacefulness she exuded seemed to make everything else around him seem more chaotic, more unnecessary. He had finally realized that the quiet moments, like the ones spent with Sophie, were the most valuable. Jack's admiration for her only deepened. He admired her unwavering calm, the way she seemed to embrace life without any need for validation or success. She was grounded in a way that he had never known, and the longer he spent with her, the more he found himself learning from her. One evening, as Jack walked into the restaurant, he noticed Sophie standing by the bar, chatting with a couple of regulars. She had a warmth about her that made everyone around her feel at ease, and Jack couldn't help but marvel at how effortlessly she made people feel seen and heard. He had never been able to do that. People always saw Jack Carter, the billionaire, the CEO, the man of power. But no one ever really saw the man beneath the title. As he approached the bar, Sophie looked up and smiled at him, her eyes lighting up as she recognized him. "Good to see you, Jack," she said, her voice as calm as ever. "How's your day been?" Jack took a seat next to her, his heart racing slightly. He had something on his mind, something he had been meaning to say for a while. "It's been good," he said, but his mind wasn't focused on his day. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said. About peace and being present." Sophie raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What about it?" "I've realized that I've been so focused on everything else, on success, on power, on always achieving more, that I've missed out on the most important things," Jack said, his voice steady but full of meaning. "I've missed out on living." Sophie listened quietly, her gaze never leaving him. "And what have you learned?" she asked softly. Jack let out a deep breath, feeling the weight of his words. "I've learned that I don't need to keep pushing for more. I don't need to prove myself to anyone. I just need to be here, in the moment, and appreciate what I have." Sophie smiled, her eyes filled with understanding. "I'm glad you're seeing it, Jack," she said. "It's easy to get caught up in the chase, to think that you need more to be happy. But true happiness comes from within, from how you choose to live." Jack nodded, feeling a sense of calm wash over him. He wasn't used to feeling so at peace with himself, but for the first time in a long while, he didn't feel the need to keep chasing. He was content. He had everything he needed right in front of him. And as he looked at Sophie, he realized that she had been the one to help him see that. "I don't know what I would have done without you, Sophie," he said, his voice full of gratitude. "You've changed my life." Sophie's smile grew softer, and she reached out, gently resting her hand on his. "You changed your life, Jack. I just helped you see the way." Jack looked at her, his heart swelling with gratitude. He had spent so much of his life looking for success, but now he realized that true success wasn't about what you had or achieved. It was about who you were, how you lived, and the connections you made along the way. And in that moment, sitting next to Sophie, he knew he had finally found the peace he had been searching for all along.